Hey Luke, how's it going, buddy?
Good, Mike. Yourself?
I'm doing great. Thanks for joining me on the podcast. Just a 15 seconds of background. Luke, I'll let him tell his story, but Luke and I met in a training facility called RPP Baseball in New Jersey a couple summers ago. Stayed in touch, and now here we are. Talking about what Luke's doing and all the good things he's got to share. So I'm going to let him sort of take over the microphone and steal the show here. So Luke, for those who are listening, can you give a little bit of background about yourself? Just whatever you want to share.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me, Mike.
My pleasure.
I'm excited to be on. Um, so I guess, we'll start way back when. Started playing baseball in like third grade. That was when Coach Pitch started. I think I might have played T-ball when I was a little younger, but I didn't really start taking it seriously until after COVID year. I played some summer ball, started training with Tryout Athletics at the time. And I really got invested in the training process. um I saw a lot of improvement in my own development at the time. Went from like 78, 80 miles an hour all the way up to like 88, 90 at that time. I got recruited to go play baseball at Seton Hill. Spent 4 years there. Ups and downs. Experienced it all, that's for sure. And now going into my fifth year of school, I'll be playing baseball at the University of Pittsburgh. And just started my training business this summer, as you know. But yeah, it's been a wild ride, but more exciting every day.
It's really cool, and I'm certain there's so many things in there that I'd love to know about. That you sort of glossed over. But to
Mhm.
go from hey, I started playing, even starting you telling me you started playing baseball in third grade, which in the world we live in, that's actually late. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
and to get to where you got to play Division II baseball for 4 years and be so successful that you could pitch in a Power 4 league, that's really impressive. So a couple things I'm curious about knowing about. At what point did you know that you wanted baseball to be a bigger part of your life?
So yeah, that was definitely that sophomore year I mentioned of high school. When we had that COVID season. My freshman year, when I made the JV baseball team, I was actually a practice squad player.
Hmm.
My coach told me, we can't promise you you're going to pitch at all, but they liked that I was 6 feet tall at the time and I weighed probably about 190 pounds. And they thought I had a chance to develop into something. That season, I ended up pitching like 15 innings, something of that sort. Um, did pretty well. I actually had great command that year for what it was. And, I was looking forward to, improving, starting to put on velo and like, I felt some motivation to get better and like be a good high school baseball player. So fast forward to sophomore year, I was doing winter workouts with the baseball team, stuff that the high school had set up and put together. But I'd been pushing myself a lot ever since the end of that freshman year, trying to throw harder, find ways to get better. I started like lifting consistently on my own. I just didn't really like know what I was doing. Like any kind of like any high school kid, they get in the weight room and they do some curls and some bench press and some squats, but it's like it's totally unstructured and there's not a lot of direction to it. Uh, as we got into our tryouts that winter, I was throwing like 80. I topped out at 83 at one point. Um, and I'd felt really accomplished because we had live ABs and I struck out one of my teammates that ended up having an incredible career at Pitt, finished at Texas A&M. Um, but for me at the time, like looking back now, it seems so silly, but for me at the time, that was incredibly motivating to me. I thought, okay, maybe this year I could like push for a spot on the varsity team as a sophomore, which was a goal for most guys in high school because it was more common to just, freshmen, sophomores were on JV, junior, seniors were varsity players. Um, and then all that went crashing down when COVID hit. So Um, that's when I started working with Tread. I actually got into a men's league that summer with some of my other teammates that would have been playing. And so it was like, I think the average age on our team might have been like 20 years old. We were all like 15, 16, and then we were playing against like 28-year-olds. Um, but it was a lot of fun. And that was when I really started to learn about the development, and I started to see progress almost immediately, in terms of the velocity, and like something in my mind during that summer just kind of clicked, and I was like, yeah, like, I could see myself doing this in college. And then, as that progression kind of continued, I was like, maybe I could do this professionally. And the passion just kind of started to grow from there.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things I take out of it, right? Because you mentioned motivation, and the sense I get is that you're extremely internally motivated, right? As a person, your personality is, I want to do this to get better, right? Having a growth mindset, a very, sort of typical way to say it. But even still, those experiences, like the one you mentioned, like, oh, I struck that guy out who went on to play at Pitt and then Texas A&M, like that's external motivation, which it does maybe seem silly because it was one at bat, but it's proof, right? It's real proof
Yep.
that what you're doing is working. And that can be the thing that, and we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, but from a sports psychology standpoint, that experience, even though it's like a, very like small thing in the grand scheme of things, that can be the thing that we always go back to as the reminder that, like, hey, like I'm pretty good, right? A lot of times
Mhm.
we forget the good stuff and we only harp on the negative, and now we see the bad stuff. I gave up that home run in that game, right? So like it's interesting to kind of see how you kind of relate to motivation. The other part of that I'm curious about is, tell me about like the people outside of you, right? Externally, meaning specifically your parents, right? Your parents sounds like they supported you through the process. And it doesn't sound like they pushed you based on the little bit that you've shared. But what about like some of the coaches you've played for as well? How did that influence your desire to get to the next level?
Yeah, so my dad was heavily, heavily involved with my baseball career ever since maybe I was 9, 10 years old. I there was a time where I expressed like a deep interest in pitching. At the time we were kind of moving from the coach pitch the the kid pitch, and I think the first time I was ever allowed to pitch, I came out and I like hit 3 kids in a row. And the rule was you have to come out of the game if you hit too many guys. So I didn't think too much about that at the time. I was just like, oh well, can't do that again. But the more I started to get interested in the pitching stuff, my dad, naturally, he's very analytical. He does computer software engineering, and so he's working on stuff, doing research all day long. He started to get interested in the stuff Driveline was putting out. So I think I might have been 10 or 11 years old when I had my first pair of J bands and some Plyo balls. And we didn't really use the Plyo balls until I got to like 13, 14, I don't think. But I would do the J band routine every time I got to the field. He had me do it. He told me it's going to protect my arm and all that stuff. So I got a very, you know, I guess analytical mindset, or like, I want to prepare the right way. And like, I always knew it was more than just getting to the field, picking up a ball and trying to throw it as hard as I can, from a young age. So sometimes I catch myself. I notice that like some athletes don't do things that I think are so commonplace, and I have to like take a step back and remind myself that, you know, I come from a pretty unique background where my dad was like that involved and he cared that much to make sure that at a young age I was taking care of my body, preparing the right way,
Mhm.
doing all those things. So, he definitely set me up for success in terms of how I take care of preparing myself and recovering as well. Um, my high school coach, another big one, he found a way to make the game really, really fun for all of us. Also like the freshman season when I made the JV team as a practice squad player. Like to me, um, at that time in my life, I didn't know if I was gonna make the high school baseball team. I just was gonna try out. And I was super thankful that he gave me a chance to play. Obviously, like my life would look entirely different right now had that not happened. Um, so super thankful for that. He gave me the opportunity, and then the growth I experienced through Emmaus Baseball was just fantastic. I made some great friendships. We won two conference championships and a district championship in the 2 years I was on varsity. Went to the second round of states both years. So it was a very, very fun, competitive environment. And I was very, I think as an athlete, that's the least in my head I've ever been. It was the most natural baseball has ever felt. Um, to me, sometimes I talk about athletes kind of losing a sense of who they were. Um, to me, my ideal is mentally, I want to feel and play baseball like I did in high school because I was the most free and athletic and confident I think I've ever felt.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot in that answer that I could sort of pick on there. But the last thing you said, I think, is really important for any player who's listening, any pitcher who's listening. That competitiveness comes in the present moment, right? Like when I'm just playing, like I did when didn't matter. Like that's when I'm at my best because I'm not thinking about anything else, right? And I think that is hard to experience, especially, and we'll talk about this in a bit, when you go to a new place at the next level where maybe the demands are different, the expectations are different, the relationships are different, because that ability to be yourself and compete and be present in the moment also, in my view, requires an immense amount of trust, right? Where I can trust that I can be myself and compete. And even if that means I'm on the losing end of that competition, the people who are around me are not going to put me down or change the way they view me based on the result. They're going to view me based on the way I showed up in that moment to compete, because that's the thing that reveals your character as a person. Having those people around you value that over outcomes, I think, is really critical in that process of being a competitor.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like you have to be yourself on the mound as a competitor in any sport. I truly believe if you go out and you pitch to your best ability, you don't do more than what you're capable of, and you don't hold back at all. Um, more often than not, the results take care of itself. And if you truly prepared the right way, if you take care of your process and you have trust in your process,
Mm-hmm.
the results truly don't matter to you in the moment. They're just a part of the bigger picture that you're putting together. And, I think like, to your point too, like having an environment where your teammates hold you accountable to the way you act rather than the results you produce is very, very important. I was blessed to be part of a great program at Seton Hill where, you know, there would be times where, you could go out there, throw a bunch of strikes, and you might give up like 6 runs, 8 runs. Like stuff happens. I've seen
Sure.
it all. But there's other times you go out and you have a great game, but like those guys in the dugout, they didn't care what happened on the field. Obviously, we'd be upset if we lost the game. Like we're all very fierce competitors, but I'd argue that they respect the guy more who can come in after facing failure and be a great teammate to everybody else. Support the guy who's got to go out and pick up the rest of the team next. Keep the game together. Versus a guy who just naturally has it, can go out, be the ace like every time, but treats his teammates like crap. Like that just would not fly at that school. And I think that's what makes us such or made us such a like great winning
Mm-hmm.
program was that we were all on the same page, right? We all wanted the same things. And there was like a certain standard of like who you had to be and like, it wasn't just it was like we held each other accountable to being the best people you could be and not being result oriented. It's kind of different because I haven't really experienced that too many other places. Most people just they want to win, they want the results, and it's like they just they do or say whatever they can to help you get the results, not become a better person.
Precisely. And the word that comes to mind there, and I don't want us to go too far down the rabbit hole, but just
Yeah.
is the culture of the program,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Those standards are tied to controllable actions, behaviors, character, right? If that's how I'm being judged, then I'm going to play up to that standard. And as long as I do that, yeah, maybe the results aren't good. And, there's a whole level of being able to sort of handle adversity that comes with that. But is that better than I'm not going to go out there and play to that standard from a character standpoint? Now I'm just chasing outcomes, and whatever I do is not necessarily the right thing to do, right? Like give an F bomb to an umpire or throw my
Yep.
helmet or, MF my teammates or whatever.
Yep.
Like if that's acceptable, as long as the results are there, that's going to make for a very disparate culture. And we could go down a whole road of the transfer portal and things like that. I don't want to go down that, even though you've probably had that experience. Um, but what I do want to hear more about though is that piece where you left high school, which clearly had a really positive experience, and then you were freshman at Seton Hill. What was that transition like for you initially?
Yeah, so I think or well, I guess I'll start with going into Seton Hill. I was definitely very, very excited, right? It was something new for me, ready to go showcase who I was, and what I could do. And throughout the beginning of the fall, that confidence kind of continued. Um, but I would also say in high school, right? I mentioned it felt very natural, athletic. I don't think I understood fully what allowed me to be natural, athletic, and free, like in my mind out there. So when I got to Seton Hill and I started to experience a new culture, right? Different personalities. I'm now an 18-year-old dealing with some guys who are 22, maybe 23 years old if, they were there for their fifth year. And I think, you look at it as like, oh, well, there's freshmen that play with seniors and high school teams, but there's a much bigger gap than I think high school kids realize between the maturity of an 18-year-old and a 22, 23-year-old. Even the difference between 18 to 21, you'll see a guy come in um, as a junior, you know, a lot of players have had some time, experience, adversity under their belt, and they just kind of act different, hold themselves differently. Um, I don't know if that intimidated me as a freshman, but there was definitely something that, challenged me a little bit more and was like, are you really who you say you are? So it made me start to second guess and doubt myself a little bit. Um, and then on top of that, I was taking like somewhere between 15 and 18 credits the very first semester. So I was struggling to stay on top of my classwork and all that stuff. So overall, it was just a very like humbling freshman fall semester. Um, but from that point on, everything kind of turned around, right? Like I didn't play my freshman year. I redshirted. I was dealing with some elbow pain that had lingered since high school. And freshman year, I threw, 17 to 20 innings, something like that. But it was much more like slow, linear progression than what I was used to. In high school, it was like, I made the JV team. Sophomore season got canceled. Started doing some training, got way better, and then the gap I was able to create between myself and the other competition in high school was huge. But it gets a lot tougher when you get into college, even at Division 2, Division 3 levels. It doesn't matter where you're playing, like you're going up against guys with a lot more experience than you. Um, but I think overall the thing that I I tend to draw on is the struggles that I had my freshman fall is like that built me into a better person. It showed me, what could happen if I don't take care of preparing the right way, if I don't pay attention to the details. And once I started to take better care of those things myself, I started to find the confidence again to be who I wanted to be and establish myself in the program with a larger role, and start to impact other people again.
Yeah, and I think, I think it's natural for anybody who steps onto a college campus as a true freshman. The question, whether it's phrased this way in someone's mind or it's some variation, is, do I belong here? Right? Like that
Hmm.
question is going to pop up. And it sounds like you face that question in some form or fashion, right? But like that's where the having a clear understanding of who you are, what you value, and then why you're there. Because the thing that I do kind of take out of all the things you said so far, and there's a lot of adjectives I could use to describe Luke based on what I know about you. I think patience is also something that describes you, which is not unique, right? For any 18-year-old or 19-year-old or 20-year-old normally, but now we live in a world where patience is just not, it's not trained, it's not valued, it's patience is like a dirty word. Like I want to play day one, I want to start, I want to get at bats, I want to have a really good year, and then I want to put myself in the transfer portal and go somewhere else so I can move up and get to a better place. Versus,
Yep.
hey, I redshirted because I had an injury. I learned through that process. I came and pitched the next year and I had 15 innings, and yeah, it was a slow burn, it was a slow progression, but I kind of knew that this was what I needed to do. And you were willing to look at the bigger picture and embrace the process of development. Like that is a skill and an attribute that is really critical, regardless of whether you stay in one place or you're at three. It's a long road, and I think sometimes athletes in that phase of life look at things through the lens of benchmarks of like, am I good enough based on this metric or this statistic or this or this, and then they answer that question and go, no, I'm not good enough, I'm terrible, and then they lose their confidence, they lose their motivation, and then they start to spiral. How do I get myself back onto the track of, hey, you do belong here, there's a reason, yeah, you've gone through some hard stuff, but you know why you're here, you know what you can handle, pick your head up, keep going. And if I keep doing that training, if I keep developing and preparing myself, I'm going to get what I want, eventually. Even if the outcome's not what I want, I'm going to turn into a really good person and I'm going to give everything I have. That's not that normal, I don't think.
Yeah. No, no, 100%. But I think it's very important, right? If you want to be a successful person and get better at what you do and, get better at influencing other people, helping them become better. I think it's very important to be where your feet are. That's something we talk about at Seton Hill all the time. Um, we would look as a pitching staff, we would look at our feet when we would meet before games, practices. We just take a couple seconds, right? Just as a reminder of like, all right, we're here right now. This is what we're focused on. My teammates, right? Like, what's the task at practice? And so it kept everybody focused, moving towards one goal. Um, you mentioned the transfer portal a little bit and guys kind of wanting to jump from place to place. That's not something I experienced too much with the culture at Seton Hill. That's something I experienced a little bit more with summer ball. Um, and I agree with you 100%, right? It stems from the mindset and typically the same guys that are hopping around school to school. And I say typically because it's not everybody, right? Some guys leave because they need a better situation for themselves or they earned a better situation for themselves. But I've also met a bunch of guys who they might transfer from one school to another. The level of competition isn't much different. It's not like a decision because it's closer to home. Maybe they're going to get like a little bit of NIL money, but it's like some of the moves, it's like lateral or backwards moves, and it doesn't make sense for the player's long-term career. And maybe that's not their goal all the time. Maybe sometimes the guys just want to have fun in college, and that's totally understandable. Um, but for guys that are serious about continuing to play, continuing to get better, it's very important that they take the long-term approach and that they actually welcome adversity, right? You bring that up over and over again, like adversity is the one thing that people can't take away from you. Like when you've gone through it, you've gone through it. And we talked about like second guessing yourself a little bit and all that. I started to second guess myself that freshman year of college. I don't think like that started to really go away until I went and played summer ball in the NECBL and then was able to get a playoff contract in the Cape. Um, I was able to go to a different environment where the standards of how we act weren't like just here, like in your face all the time. But in those new environments, I was able to learn like, oh, like I really do hold myself to a different standard because I've been at a program where we're diligent about practicing these things every day. And you start to notice the separation it creates between yourself and others and how valuable of a tool that is too, right? Like, some guys try to train throwing strikes or, train their velocity, but like, especially with command, it's such an interesting thing. I got so much better at throwing strikes once I just stopped believing I was bad at throwing strikes. Right? Like it sounded so ridiculous, but like I tried and tried and tried to throw strikes, freshman, sophomore year, and I wasn't awful. I definitely had room to improve if I wanted to be a good college baseball player. But until I went away and like was in a different environment where I saw people that weren't held to the same standard as me, I was like, wow, it really does make a difference. And I think it's like important to be able to take a step back from what you do sometimes because I didn't realize how invested I was in the process at Seton Hill. And now I'm almost like intentional about trying to take a step back sometimes so I don't get too locked in, too focused, right? Like I got to be able to spend my energy in different ways. Um, but yeah, I think the more you can be in your process and constantly be learning, it's awesome for growth.
100%, right? Like when I think about the example of going into new environments like a summer league or the Cape, which obviously has a lot of prestige and meaning. Um, like then I think about you talking about that practice of being where your feet are at Seton Hill because it's something I talk to guys about all the time. When you step on that mound in the Cape, it's the same mound you step on in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Absolutely.
And if I'm where my feet are, now all of a sudden baseball's baseball. I'm not looking at the Cape going, well, I've got to do something different or be different to impress the people who are watching, whether they're the fans who go spend their summer evenings on the Cape or the scouts or the coaches, whoever's there. I'm there where my feet are. I'm going to appreciate the opportunity to pitch and I'm going to do the same things I do regardless of who's surrounding me. And I talk to recruits about that a lot. Like, hey, baseball is baseball. Yes, I know it means more. Yes, I know your brain wants to manage that for you, and that's okay. But we've got to come back to those anchors. Sometimes it's I'm going to be where my feet are. Sometimes it's my breath. Sometimes it's my process, my routine, whatever that thing is. That ability to access that when it gets hard or different is that sets players apart, right? You know that
Mm.
because you're doing it. And I do want to talk about, I want to move into what you're doing coaching wise, but I think there's a bridge there in terms of a couple things you said. You mentioned the portal, and I'm all for the portal. I'm all for guys or girls having the freedom to make decisions about what's best for them. I think that the shortfall there is knowing what you value. If I'm making a move in the portal to achieve an external result that's out of my control, that might be fool's gold. If to one of the examples used, if I'm leaving Seton Hill and I'm going to Lehigh, I'm using your example, right? You're from the Lehigh Valley, because I
Yeah.
want to be closer to my family because there's something personal going on. That's the reason why I'm doing it. That's a much different rationale. There's something personal, there's something meaningful as to why I'm driving this process. Or I'm going to go from Division 1, where it was a meat grinder, to Division 3 because I love baseball and I just want to play. That's meaningful. A lot of guys don't do that. They want to move up. But when you're moving for outcomes, but the process doesn't change and you don't have the ability to deal with adversity, you're just putting yourself in another stressful situation that you're going to have to learn how to navigate from the beginning. So I think that's important. Everybody's different. They have to learn how to deal with that differently. And then I wanted to ask you about what you were just saying, because I think this ties into your coaching philosophy, at least a little bit, based on a little bit I know. Tell me about, maybe this is from a personal perspective as a pitcher, maybe it's from a coaching perspective or just generally. Tell me about sort of being able to navigate the differences between mechanical and mental as it relates to commanding your pitches, right? Like, how do you understand when it's something physical and something that's mental?
Yeah. So with pitchers, the training, there's so many variables that go into it. But I think the biggest things that affect command are, number one, your mechanics, right? You need to be, and they affect it in the sense that they need to be repeatable and consistent. Right, you want to get your release point similar spot every single time. You want to throw all of your pitches with the same intent, throwing them hard for a strike, right? Kind of like aiming down the middle, right? Letting them play, do their work. That should be the intent with every pitch, right? So I'll talk to some guys about what their intent is. Usually, if it's an intent thing, mechanical thing, I mean, like it's hard to say intent, mechanical, mental, like it
Yeah.
all goes together, right? Because when the lack of intent is there, if you take a video of a guy and you tell him to like hit this specific spot, like maybe the size of a quarter, right? And you tell him he's got to run 10 poles if he doesn't hit it on the first try, right? Just something crazy, just to give an example. He's gonna try like so hard to be so precise, right? And if you take a video of him on that throw, it's gonna look drastically different than if you put a catcher and a batter and you put him on a field, right? First inning of the game, you tell him he's got to throw a fastball for strike one, right? It's going to look incredibly different. And so I think, um, making sure that we're not putting too much pressure on a guy to throw strikes, right? Just knowing that the intent is there. But then also it shows up in like timidness. A guy will get shaky, or I see this a lot, like the shoulders and the traps start to rise up and like they get on their toes a little bit more. Yeah, right. And, you know, command, right? Like a lot of guys just look at their stats too. They might say, oh, I walked a guy every other inning, or I walk a guy almost every inning, right? I've met some guys where that's truly the case, right? They just like, maybe they just walk a guy every other inning. Like it just happens. Sometimes, like a lot of guys, though, it'll be I had a good inning or I was good for a batter or two, and then something happened, and then I walked three guys in a row, four guys in a row. And that happens multiple times through the season, right? At the end of the year, you look at the stats, you're like, okay, one walk per inning, half a walk per inning, whatever it may be. But you don't look at how he got there, right? Like, how can you say he's not a strike thrower, or like if he was throwing strikes and then something happened and then he wasn't, right? Like that something happened mentally
Yes.
on the mound. If he didn't get hurt, then something happened mentally. So what strike throwing really is, I think, is you got to have the mobility, the athleticism, obviously, to be able to throw all of your pitches, throw them hard. But mentally, like strike throwing is just you do that. You do that naturally. You just have to let yourself.
Exactly. So it's a hard question for any of us to answer. But like, I think what you're saying is very similar to the things that I experience as a mental performance coach, which is the message, right, in a textbook way is, hey, when you're competing in a game, I don't want you thinking about your mechanics, right?
Yeah.
That's a textbook answer. And I think a lot of people would agree with that. But sometimes it is mechanical. Well, if I know that it's mechanical or I really feel like I'm not in the right position, I've got to then adjust, but then commit, right? Your intent, right? So everybody has to learn how to coach themselves through that. But to your point, when an external event happens and then they start to throw balls, that's probably not mechanical. That's I want to will myself to get a good result. And now that desire to aim the ball into a spot turns into this because now it's my brain's way of protecting me, right? But as a pitcher, the only one who can do that for you is you. So you have to figure out, like this would be me talking to you if you were my client. I've got to help you figure out when that thing happens, you know what to do next.
Yeah.
Thing that works for you, right? And that's kind of leads me into sort of coaching athletes, coaching an individual and not coaching a system, right? Coaching people based on what they need. So like what shapes your point of view on that as a coach, right? The idea of coaching people to meet them where they're at, to meet the demands of the environment. Like what shapes your sort of philosophy on that as a coach?
I'd say it starts with the relationships, right? Like every athlete is going to be different. So you kind of gotta get to learn the athlete first, right? What they were like growing up, how their high school career was, if they're in college, right? Like if they've had any struggles, injuries, if they played any other sports in the past. All these different things will start to give you hints at like why they are the way they are and like who they are. Um, and then you just kind of get very intentional about like, okay, well, if this guy has this background, he's probably going to benefit more from something like this, right? Uh, I couldn't tell you exactly like how different sports learn. I'm not a sports psychologist like you are, but um, I know that there's different mindsets, different cultures, right? And as I meet different people, meet different athletes, I'm constantly learning all the time, seeing if I can find new creative ideas to help guys make a mental fix. But essentially, what I believe is that, you know, when we're competing, especially as pitchers, like I work with pitchers, the more focused and intentful we can be, the better. So what I like to kind of do with athletes is if there's stuff taking us away from being intentional, right? Like we need to work that out and focus more of our energy on the things that make us good. Um, it looks incredibly different for all different types of guys. But most of the time the things that stay the same are, we want to throw more strikes, we want to throw harder. Um, so it's getting them to focus on those things in the right way, and then also trusting that the work is going to take care of itself. The individualization really comes down to the, you know, mobility assessments, right? Some guys might need to work on their shoulder rotation, some guys might need to work more on their hips, right? So we bias certain things, but then um you know, in terms of like getting guys to think right mentally, have the right mindset on the field, that's a lot more just talking to them, getting a feel for them, having them share their experiences with me, and also me sharing my experiences with them. I notice a lot of times too when I can make myself vulnerable and share a failure that I've had, it makes athletes a lot more understanding, right? And they trust me more. They, actually want to listen to what I'm saying,
Mm-hmm.
because they're like, okay, like, this guy's coming from the same place as me. I think there might be a disconnect sometimes with athletes. They don't trust what they're being told, right? And they feel like I got to go figure this out on my own. But I try to be very understanding and, you know, show that like I'm right there with you. Like I've been through this, like,
It,
it,
it's
it
really
just builds
important.
confidence.
Yeah, the understanding, the willingness to be curious and understand an athlete in a lot of ways is sort of the secret ingredient, right? Because the lack of trust in a coach, let's just say generically, it does come from a coach who we've all had these coaches or we've all seen them. I'm the coach. I tell you what to do, right? Without any sort of understanding of you. It's just do this and get that. You're not being seen. Now that advice or that suggestion or that instruction, which doesn't work for me, now all of a sudden I'm going to go do it, but I don't feel good about it, right? So this is a conversation I have, and maybe you've had this experience where players will be like, my coach, whether I'm a hitter or a pitcher, my coach said, you need to change this. This is the fix. So they do it blindly. They don't question it, but it doesn't feel right. Right.
Yeah.
So then they go do that thing because they feel like I got to do it because if I don't do it, my coach is going to get pissed at me or they're not going to play me or whatever. And they can't have the dialogue with the coach, but then they internalize it and they continue to do that thing that's not helping them. Or, right, like, or they make it emotional, becomes personal, and now they get into an argument or a disagreement versus sometimes it's, I want to communicate with my coach, hey, this suggestion isn't working. Let's figure out what does work for me. And a lot of athletes are not comfortable having that conversation, which is also a very big part of what I do, much bigger than I ever would have imagined, is how do I have that conversation? But listen, like I had a kid, he's probably 25 years old now, who played baseball in the ACC, was a starter on a College World Series team. And he told me they changed my stance and I wasn't comfortable. And so what I said to him was this, I said, do you think you can go back to the old way of doing it? He's like, yeah, I could try it. He's like, I'm like, did you do it? And he's like, yeah, I did it. Did it feel good? Yep. I got better results. I felt good. Did your coaches notice it? Nope. So my point in telling that story is sometimes coaches coach because that's what they're paid to do, but they're not always following up on that. And they're not always like going to evaluate that. Like I hate to say it this way, but they may not give a shit. Excuse my language, right? They just give you that advice in the moment and they move on to the next thing because they've got 100 things to do, which is a whole nother conversation, right? Athletes need to understand coaches have a lot of responsibilities, but ultimately it's on you to make the fixes for you that work. Having the confidence to do that and know what works for you is important. So from a mental standpoint, to go back to what you were saying, a question I'll ask a client, an athlete is, when you've been your best, what are you doing? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? Let's uncover that. Well, when I'm pitching my best, I'm attacking the strike zone. I'm in an attack mentality. Okay, so how do we find the process that allows you to repeat the attack mentality on every single pitch? Because if you're in that state, it might not work every single time, but over the long run, if I'm attacking every single pitch, regardless of circumstance, the results are going to be better than not. If I'm responding to the results and I'm not attacking anymore because I'm afraid of making more mistakes, now the results are going to be crappy. So we got to find a way to get back in that example to attack faster. Because when I attack and when I compete, when I'm myself, I dominate. Well, we got to do that. We can't get so far away from that. Now, all of a sudden we're in a spiral and we forget that we know how to dominate. We just feel bad about ourselves and we second guess ourselves. And now it's harder to get back to the anchor point where success happens. So it was kind of long-winded, but yeah. So like, tell me about how you're doing that with athletes, like in the types of athletes that you're pitchers that you're doing with now, like what's the profile of the guys that you're working with and how do you sort of work through it with them?
So right now, mainly just college guys. I worked with a bunch of my summer ball teammates this summer. Got home and starting to pick up some more local guys that I've had mutual contacts with. Um, Now it's we do like I said, a lot of conversing, one-to-one talking, just getting to learn each individual.
Mm-hmm.
I love to see guys play on the field, right? Like if I could have a facility and have them come in, throw a bullpen, but I'm not seeing what's raw and like what's real. Like I'd love to go show up to a game when like nobody knows, like the pitcher doesn't know I'm there, like he doesn't know somebody's watching, evaluating, and I just want to see how he acts, like how he plays, how he holds himself when things get tough, if there's runners on, right? Does he freak out when there's a runner on second base? Like, is he looking back? Does he know how to change his timing and all that? Um, that tells me a lot more about like, okay, can we like focus on trying to spin the curveball more? Or do we need to like figure out how to be mentally consistent for, 2 innings if we're like a late reliever, or an inning if we're like I mean, closers are a little bit different. You just need to go be good enough for an inning. Or if you're a starter, that's when you really want to see that a guy can go out there, like stick to his plan, right? He has his own plan of attack before the game starts. He sticks to it, adjusts when needs to. But like if adversity happens, you don't want to see anything change, right? And if you see something change, that's immediately to me like, okay, this is the starting point. This is the foundation of where we need to improve from. Because to me, that's like, okay, this athlete has been exposed, right? He gave up a double or he gave up a homer, and everything changed after that. And they got, they might be able to bring it back, right? But I try to keep track of these examples of proof, like you talk about. Going back to that kid I struck out in my high school tryouts, right? Those little bits of proof, I use those, try to shine a mirror on the athlete's face and say, like, hey, this is who you are, right? You went four batter, like maybe you went three up, three down your first inning, came out, got the first out, hit a guy, walked a guy, gave up a double, 2 runs scored, you get pulled, right? Stat line does not look good. They're not happy with it, right? Maybe they're in the portal and they needed to have a good outing, right? All these things. But at the end of the day, it's like, okay, I tell them this is where the outing went wrong, right? I try to like lay their outing out to them. I said, what if you just like did what you did for those first 4 hitters for like 2 more, right? Or like, what if you, after you hit that guy, what if you didn't walk the next guy, but you stepped off the mound, found a focal point, deep breath, reset, and got back
Exactly.
on the mound and was just like, okay, I'm gonna
Back to
do what I
business.
did right before I hit this guy.
Exactly.
Right? That's
You
all
got
it
it.
is. That's all it is.
That's
And
it.
and like with older guys, I like that I can be a little tougher on them because I know their college coaches already have been. Sometimes what I think they need to hear is really just like F it. Like if you feel like there's all this pressure on you in the entire world to throw a strike right now, or like, it's embarrassing, or you're not going to get the offer you're looking for, like that to me has become a trigger to
Yep.
just be like, all right, F it. Like I
Right.
don't even like I'm like I know I'm thinking too much. I know bad things happen when I think too much. So like I'm just gonna turn my brain off and throw this pitch and see what happens.
That's the refocus cue, right? For
Yeah.
some guys, and that in that example you just gave, right? F it, and that's real. Like I've dealt with that with, like that's got to be the refocus cue, but that has to
Yeah.
also be consistent every single time that bad thing happens, or that feeling comes up, or that thought comes up.
Yeah.
That reset needs to be automatic. Take a walk, take a deep breath, tell yourself F it, get back on, and commit to executing the next pitch the way you want to, regardless of
Yeah.
outcome. That's going to allow you to get what you want. But I think the hardest part about that, and this is where I'll tell you a story, because what you said about observation is so true, and it's I'm a big believer. I think we share a similar philosophy without even knowing it. Watching people do the thing is really important, because we can see it objectively from the outside, but when that tempest is going in between their ears, they lack the awareness sometimes because the emotion takes over. So someone's ability on the outside, especially if it's someone they trust, to see it and feed it back to them, like, this is what I saw. I saw your body language change. I saw your face change. I saw your intent change. And it's okay. We all go through it. But the next time you get into that situation, we want to be able to flip it faster with an effort or a breath or be where my feet are, or whatever that thing is that works for you.
Yeah.
So when I've been working with this guy who's a college pitcher now, I started working with him when he was in high school. And I share this story because one, it's very similar to what you're saying, but I think it's also very instructive about the coaching process. The first time I went to watch him go play, he was in high school and he didn't know I was going. And he was committed. He was a D1 commit, really good shit. But mentally, obviously, he was working with me, so there was probably something that he needed to be better at. So I went to go watch him. First inning, what you described, walk around, merry-go-round, 4 walks, probably 30 pitches, really awful first inning. But then in the second inning, when he came out, second, third, I think he pitched maybe 4 and change. It was clean. There was an adjustment mentally, got back to work, got guys out. Now, he didn't know I was there, to your point. And I texted him after the game. I said, you did a really good job. You're a Bulldog. You did a really good job of bouncing back after a first inning, which was true. It was not making it up, right? And it's not the thing that in his default would be, he would normally focus on the negative. So I thought like, hey, I'm giving him positives. Like maybe this is a good step forward to say, hey, one, I came to watch you play, which is in and of itself a trust factor. But B, I'm giving you some really positive feedback about the way you handled adversity. And his response back to me at the time was, yeah, but the umpire squeezed me on that pitch. And right then and there, I knew exactly what I was up against, right?
Yeah.
Like that idea that the only thing that mattered was the outcome and the result and what someone else did versus, hey, I could feel really good about my ability to bounce back from adversity. And yeah, the first inning sucked, but you know what? I got back on track and I pitched really well and I didn't let it submarine me. But seeing that and observing that and talking about that and understanding the way a guy looks at the game is so important to helping them come up with creative solutions to find the thing that works for them, right? Because the reset process is a staple in what I do, but the intent and the meaning in the reset process has got to be different for everybody.
Yeah.
Because if you can't say F it every single time you need to because you don't believe it or because you're so scared of the result, then maybe F it's not the cue either. Maybe the cue is, hey, I got to go back to something that's more controllable and more believable, right? Because my brain has to be able to believe how I'm working that reset. If I just tell myself F it, but I don't really believe F it because this is too important, I got to find something that's more neutral that allows me to just focus on the action, right? So I say all that to say, like, it's really about what you started with, which is understanding the person, understanding the background, understanding how they see the world, and then finding the solutions and the training process that allows them to embrace it and then go execute on it so that they can be themselves and bounce back in a way and pitch in a way that's consistent with their identity and is not fake or false or only predicated on mechanics or results, which happens a lot as well. So, but that's a really hard thing to do. Coaching from that place, as I'm sure you've learned or learning, is really hard because everybody's different, but it's also, you've got to be really dialed in to learning about a guy and what makes him tick and be patient with him as he goes through those stages of, you know, discomfort and grief and anger and all that stuff so that you can stay with him long enough so that he kind of is like, oh, light bulb goes off. Now I'm good. Let's go keep going. Let's go do it. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it's a little different for everybody. Like F it may not be the cue. To me, that's something that my cue has always been similar. Sometimes I need a deep breath, right? Sometimes I need more of like all right, like I have all this adrenaline going, like it feels like it's gonna boil over. I need to just like harness it. And that's kind of more when I'm like that effort mentality, right? When I feel like everything's moving 1,000 miles an hour. Um, and I was in Vermont this summer, and I'm gonna make a quick comparison. On our off days, we'd go out to like small water spots, swim holes, and jump off cliffs, whatnot. If you've never done like cliff jumping or something like that, like jumping off, you know there's water under there, but if it's like a 20-foot drop or something, you stand up there and your legs shake as you look down at it. You're like, I've never done this before. Is it going to be okay? Like that's very similar to how it can feel out on the mound sometimes, right? And so it's just like having blind trust, right? And like I think we have to remind ourselves too. This could even be like a pregame ritual type thing. Like we're out there playing a game, so at the end of the day, like whatever happens, you're gonna be okay, right? The same way, like you're standing up on top of that cliff, right? Like 20 feet from the water. You know the water's deep enough, but all you see is everything that could happen between the top of the cliff and the water. You don't see the safety net at the bottom.
Yeah.
So it's just like you got to be willing. When I say F it, I'm thinking is like in the sense of, okay, I'm willing to face this challenge head on and accept whatever comes of it. Right. And sometimes I think people make that too broad. They might think like, okay, I'm going to do that for the whole game. Sometimes what it really comes down to is like you'll be in your flow state for, I don't know, 50, 60, 70% of the game. It's how do you manage that other 30% where you're not fully locked in and you have to get yourself back in that mindset. And I think that's where if you can cue yourself to like keep going, like, all right, face your fears, like it's not getting tougher, like it's all in your head, you know. You continue to find the areas to improve and you just add on to those. You don't take away from what you do well, you just add on to what you don't do well, build a bigger picture.
Yeah. So I want us to wrap up because we're coming up an hour. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but
No
I
worries.
think, I think there it's awareness, right? A lot of guys lack the awareness in those moments to know that those things are going on, which clearly you have as a pitcher because you can identify it. Like I have that adrenaline going, or maybe my thoughts are somewhere else. Sometimes the emotion of the situation, this is what I find in my experience, the emotion of a given situation on the field is so overwhelming that they can't get out. They don't have enough awareness to bring themselves back to where they want to be because they're so emotional. And emotional regulation can be a part of the process. But I think your example about cliff jumping is right on the money, and it's also different. So it's right on the money because the brain's response to that's exactly the same, right? Well, what's going to happen if I jump off this cliff? What's going to happen when I let go of this ball? Right? 100% exactly the same. Here's the difference. The difference is when I jump in that water the first time and I land safely, I get back on that cliff and I do it again and I don't even think twice. Why?
Yeah, that is a very good point there.
The difference is baseball is a part of a pitcher's identity. So there's all
Hmm.
that proof to support the idea that I jumped off that cliff already for the last 10 years as a baseball player. But in that moment, I can't get over how bad it's going to feel if I let go of this ball and I fuck up.
Yep.
Once I jump off that cliff, literally in Vermont, and I get in, I'm like, oh, this is fun. I'm great. I'm not thinking like, well, what if I don't do it again? I don't care. It's just cliff jumping. It's fun. Baseball is if it's too much of who I am, then
Yep.
it becomes a referendum on who I am every single time I let go of that ball, even if all the proof tells me I'm going to be fine. Right. So the identity element for me as a mental performance coach is I've got to figure out who I am as a person that allows me to believe that I can overcome whatever happens after I let go of that ball and it's out of my control. Okay, I hit a guy in the back. I walked a guy. I got the hook. I didn't get the offer. I still believe in myself and who I am enough that I can handle this adversity, right? That's the difference. And I think the identity piece is so important in sports because it does, especially in the world we live in, become such a big part of who we are that even when all the evidence is stacked in your favor, we forget it in that moment when this pitch could be life and death. It could mean the difference between me going from high school to college or college to pro. And in those moments, it seems like life and death. And it's so scary that unless we know how to train that awareness and train that response so that even that scary feeling that's basically a verdict on our identity as a baseball player every single time we let go of that ball, I know how to handle it. I train that. And that's what I try to do. And it's that part of my coaching practice has evolved. I've learned that identity is so much about this process of we have to know who we are, like we started, who we are, what we stand for, what we value, what we're capable of, not just performance wise, but from a character standpoint, and being able to work on that every single day to be like, hey, even if I pitch like shit today, I'm still a good person. I'm still a good pitcher. It's just a bad day. And I can learn from that, which is clearly a part of who you are as a pitcher. I reflect, I learn, I move towards growth versus I stay and dwell on the outcomes and judge myself incessantly to the point where I start to question whether or not I want to do this anymore because it's too damn hard. And I think being able to train somebody to get to that point takes a lot of work and understanding and creativity. And that's the part of mental performance coaching that I think is extremely important, that a lot of people, I don't know what other people do, so I shouldn't say it that way. I just know that for me, as my identity as a coach is about helping people understand themselves and be happy and be fulfilled and be successful in a way that has nothing to do with their stat line looks like. That's not that easy to do.
No,
Yeah.
no, not at all. But I think, right, for the type of people I like to work with, and, I think we share a similar audience, sharing
Mm-hmm.
similar perspectives, stuff like that. You know, the people that tend to put a lot of their performance, or, they call that their identity, right? To me, that tells me they care a lot and that they can be really, really good at what they do.
Mm-hmm.
They just need to learn how to organize their energy a little bit better, compartmentalize things, focus on what's important when it's important, and let the things that aren't important go when they're not, right? You got to be present where you're at, not carrying everything around all the time. 100%.
That's a great way to end, because I think that that's exactly right on point. Learning how to organize that, because they do care, right? We care so much that a bad result can derail us. But if we know how to organize our thoughts and our energy and our emotions to then get back on track faster and go back to doing that thing that we love to do and that we're really good at, now all of a sudden it doesn't seem so daunting. So I think that's a great way to sort of summarize it. So before we finish up, what's the best way for people to find you? Where should they go look to learn more about what Luke's doing?
Yeah, so my main Instagram, that's mainly just all my baseball stuff, is Luke.Deschenes. I don't know if you throw a tag up or
I
something.
will.
My last name's funny to spell. And then my company, EPD Pitching, there's an underscore in between that. Both of those on Instagram. Trying to get a Twitter going with the company as well. But we have a website linked in our bio. Post about three posts a week, just keeping our audience informed, trying to spread what we do and, grow the business. But yeah, I appreciate you having me, Mike. It was a great time.
It was a great time for me too. I learned a lot from you, and it was a really fun conversation. I have to cut myself off sometimes. So, with all that, I'll take everything you just shared in terms of getting in touch and put it into the show notes, and people have a way to reach out to you. And hopefully, we can keep this conversation going past this recording. So, Luke, thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Mike.